Let's bow, please. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you on this last Rotary before Christmas for blessings far too many for us to count oftentimes. So let us pause right now and consider what some of those may be, not the least of which is our friends and our family, those around this table in the meal we just partaken. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Scott. Welcome to the last official meeting of 2021. Secretary Lynn is attending a conference today, so she was unable to be here, so I'm kind of winging it. So bear with me as we get through the program here. Hope everybody had a good weekend. I know I thought I had my yard all cleaned up for the fall, and then after Saturday, I think all the leaves from my neighbor's yard were now in my yard. So I spent yesterday cleaning up my yard again. So hopefully that's it for the season. Wanted to give a little shout out to Ted Buehler here. Our teapot, which has been broken for some time, is now re-welded. So it's good for another 50 years. Also, just to acknowledge a little oversight, last week we gave out the checks for the flag program, and the public library, Wayne County Public Library, puts up flags there, and they also received a check. And Chris Bailey was here last week. Chris, I know you're online this week, but he was here and could have accepted the check, but we kind of missed that one. So I apologize to the library. That's actually a great way for those of you who maybe don't live in town or something, and you want to support the flag program, to buy a flag for the Wayne County Public Library, and then they put it up right there at the library for all the holidays. I think last year we had something like 14 flags there, and we'd like to see more, so that's a great opportunity to do that. Also just wanted to mention a little lost and found item. There was an Apple, looks like an iPad sort of pen that was left on one of the tables last week. So if it's yours, I'll have it up here after the meeting. Just note that in January 15th, the Wooster Speech and Debate team will be having the Sharon B. Altoff Rotary Invitational. So we do sponsor that tournament. Coach Custer and a couple of the students will be here on January 17th to accept that check. I've been talking to some of the folks in the parents program, and the team numbers this year are a little bit down, so the parents need help. So I know that some of you out there have been alumni of the program, or maybe your kids were in it, and they said any help for that tournament day would be appreciated. They just have various jobs that need to be done that day. So if you have time on January 15th, just let me know and I'll contact you with the coach. All right, so today in history, December 13th, 1978, Cleveland, Ohio becomes the first major American city to default on its financial obligations since the Great Depression. And I thought that was interesting. I saw that little note, so I looked into it a little further. It was the Cleveland Public Power Utility Company that evidently there were some banks involved that declined to increase their revolving line of credit, primarily because the banks had an interest in another company called the Illuminating Company. So I think it was Dennis Kucinich at the time who basically didn't get reelected the following year because of that, but later on he was sort of exonerated and said that was inappropriate for the banks to do that. So it was kind of an interesting little fact for history. Okay, so for the guests today, I know we have several. What we're going to do, since Lynn's not here, is if you have a guest, we're going to start here at Mike Davis at this front table. But after Mike introduces his guest, if you have a guest, if you could please stand and petition.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, and I have the honor to introduce you some guests from Buehler's Fresh Foods, our CFO, Peter O'Donnell, our Vice President of Operations, Paul Stephanon, our Vice President of Human Resources, Yvonne Renee, and the wife of 45 years of our guest speaker, Dan Shanahan, Rosie Shanahan. It's good to have you with us today.
Any other guests over here? Oh, here.
Good afternoon. I'm Bonnie Hall, and I wanted to introduce my guest. This is my mini P, my daughter Megan Hall. Megan is an esthetician in town, and she works at the new B Radiant Lash Salon.
I guess on this side of the room, Marty.
I found these two wandering the streets of Worcester and they looked hungry, so I brought them up. My husband Paul and my daughter Kelly.
Any in the middle? I know Ron Amstutz has a guest over here on this side.
My guest today is Ken Hawkins, who is the chaplain at Wayne County Jail and also the director of Really Recovered.
Any other guests? Thank you, Letitia. All right, at this time, if I could call President-elect Greg Long up, we would like to recognize our cooks for all that they do for us during the year. So if you could all come up front here, we have a little token of our appreciation for all of your efforts. So we'd like to thank all of you for everything that you do for us. I know the past year has been tough, and we never know what's coming next, but we appreciate all of your assistance in helping us week to week. So as I call out your name here, Greg will hand you your check. So Sarah Busey, Christine Baumgartner, Abigail Bennett. I thought they would have been in alphabetical order there. Shannon Bennett. Beth Blair. Sherry Blair. Oh, sorry. And last but not least, Rita Haney. So thank you. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Doug Druschel, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, President Terry. Pleased to introduce today Dan Shanahan, the President, CEO, and Chairman of Buehler's Fresh Foods. Dan led a management buyout from the Buehler family and the conversion of the corporate structure of the company to an ESOP in late 2017. Dan had been with Buehler since 2011 and previously was president and COO. Dan's been active in the community and industry organizations, serving on the Wooster Area Chamber of Commerce Board, and boards of National Grocers Association, Ohio Grocers Association, and previous service to other industry organizations elsewhere. Before coming to Wooster, Dan was CFO and principal partner of Wilson Farms, Inc., a convenience store chain with 200 locations in New York State. For Wilson Farms, Dan was division vice president for Tops Ahold, overseeing 240 stores in upstate New York, and vice president of supply chain for the $3 billion Ahold division. I wasn't sure if it was pronounced Ahold or Ahold. Dan assures me it's Ahold. I assumed it was Ahold because people are always yelling at that at me in the car, so I just assumed they worked at a grocery store. I don't know. In the late 90s, Dan was a key executive in the Ahold expansion into Asia, serving as CEO and country manager for Singapore and Malaysia, forming a joint venture with a conglomerate in Asia and the Pacific Rim, and opening 88 stores in 4 years. During that time, Dan and his wife Rose, who you met, and their 5 children lived in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. Dan's career began as an owner-operator of a single Tops family-owned franchise before moving on as vice president and eventually becoming an equity partner in the Buffalo-based Tops supermarket chain. Dan has an MBA and a BS in economics from Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. Please join me in welcoming Dan Shanahan.
Thank you, Doug. Really happy to be here. I was asked to speak here 8 years ago, and I haven't had a call since. I don't know if it's something I said back then, or it's nice to be back. We're going to talk about, okay, maybe not. We're going to talk about 3 things today. Very briefly, what's going on recently, what's new in our industry, a little bit what's new in Buehler's. But Doug had suggested that there might be some interest in ESOPs. We became an ESOP back in 2017. So most of the presentation is to get into ESOPs for you. So what's new in the food retail business? In the last 2 years, as everybody's been affected considerably with COVID, the supermarket industry has actually benefited us a little bit. That chart that you see there is a 150-year-old chart. And it's when people eat out of the house and when they eat in the house, the blue line is eating in the house. And it's taken 150 years, but it's gotten to 50-50. And that's a number that people in the industry keep an eye on. So you look at the 2019 numbers, people spend half of their money in supermarkets, the other half in bars and restaurants. Then with COVID in 2020, it jumped up to 58%, but you have to go all the way back to 1980. When it was that percentage. And that's because the restaurants were forced to close and a lot of them went out of business. People were afraid to go out of their house with COVID. They're stocking up. So the year we're in right now, this is from the US Department of Commerce, year we're in right now came back down to about 52%. And it's really hard to forecast what's going to be going on over the next few years. A lot of the industry experts say that some of this new behavior where you're back to eating at your house more often, that some of it will stick, be stuck behavior. And the reasons are that people are realizing they like to have dinner with their family, that it helps them with their budget. They can learn about new cooking, healthy living is big, so they can eat healthier. And a lot of people work out of their home, so intuitively it makes sense. But here you can see the last 10 years in that gap last year where it really dropped down. You know, the food business, people spend $1.5 trillion on food. Again, 50% out of the home, 50% into the home. What happened in 2020 was that the supermarkets picked up 90 billion. The restaurants went down 150 billion. So people saved 60 billion, but there was a big transfer. Restaurants went down 20%, supermarkets were up 11%. And a lot of this also has to do, in 2020 was the largest annual increase in disposable income with all the checks that the government was writing. So food as a percentage of GMP became less and less and less. Just real quick on that 150-year trend, it really took off with going to 50-50 with fast foods. That red line in the middle is fast foods. Regular restaurants really haven't grown that much, but 1955 was when McDonald's opened up, and that's when it started. There's also a lot of correlations with obesity and high blood pressure and that type of thing. So anyway, bringing it right to today in our business, there's been some inflation, which we haven't seen in years. And there's really a couple factors going on there. you see it in the stores with certain categories being out of stock. We're calling those supply chain disruptions. And they just happen from time to time, and then there's a little noise that there's going to be a shortage, and then everybody stockpiles, and there's a real shortage. And it's like whack-a-mole. It's right now it's pet food and water, but it floats around into different categories. And a lot of it is labor related, with people calling in sick and COVID illnesses, and everybody that's employed in the supply chain has that happening, and that's driving retail food inflation. Retail food is up maybe 2.5% is what we kind of are thinking, but overall inflation right now is 6%. It's led by gasoline, housing, and auto. So, okay, so that's the industry, and what's new at Buehler's. You know, we bought the company from the Buehler family back in November of 2017, and when you make an acquisition, if any of you have been involved in acquisitions, you know, you're usually a little bit levered. So we spent the first few years really just trying to build our balance sheet and get a good foundation, but we wanted to grow. So we're just at that point where we're starting to grow, and ever since we bought the company, the value has gone up every year. The owners of our company are all the employees. So that's a good thing. And then last year, we received the Pinnacle Award from the Ohio Grocers Association for being the best large chain in Ohio. I'm quite proud of that. We also this year got certified as a great place to work. You have to come in, they take a survey, and your employees all vote, and you have to get a certain score, and you get the certain score, you get certified. So that's something we're working on. It's a big plus, especially for hiring. And over the last 2 years, you know, annually Supermarket News publishes how all the different chains are growing. So we just presented this to our board. Of the top 50 chains in the country, our sales were higher than year over year, all 50 of the top chains. Quite proud of that. And we just, 2 weeks ago, we opened up a new store in Galion, Ohio, and we just were awarded our 6th state liquor agency. So now we're all about growing. What's also new at Buehler's is I just announced my retirement a month ago. And usually when somebody retires, then they need to be succeeded. So we also announced who my successor is. And I don't know if you know this guy, Mike Davidson, maybe jump up and say hello. Being a member of the Rotary, that was big in our decision making, I have to tell you. Okay, so we're here to really talk about what is an ESOP. And we didn't really know too much about it. We got a couple experts at this table here. I'm not an expert, but does anybody here know a little bit about ESOPs? Maybe just raise your hand a little bit. All right, well, we're gonna try to see if we can figure out what's the best description that describes an ESOP. Anybody? No. How about this one? Oh, that's an emu, not an ESOP. Although this could be a better topic to talk about, to tell you the truth. An ESOP is an employee benefit plan that gives workers ownership interest in the company. The interest takes the form of shares of stock. ESOPs give the sponsoring company, the selling shareholder, and participants various tax benefits, making it a qualified plan. It's under 401A as a qualified defined contribution plan, which allows employees to own stock in the company for which they work. And they're subject to ERISA rules, or I guess similar to 401K. Qualified plan is an employer-sponsored retirement plan that qualifies for special tax treatment under Section 401A. So you don't pay income tax on amounts contributed by your employer until you withdraw money from the plan. It's ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. So a little bit of the history of ESOPs, where they come from, how prevalent are they out there? Well, they were established in 1956, but before that, there was a legal framework that was established to allow stock bonus plans, where you could give an employee an ownership position in the company. Most of those bonus plans were really for the top of the management group, not across the board employees. But the first real ESOP was in San Francisco. There was 2 owners of a newspaper that were ready to retire. They didn't have any family that was interested in the business. And they wanted to transfer ownership to the workers. They didn't have enough money up front, or they weren't able to borrow it. So this Kelso, who was a lawyer and an economist, he decided his idea was to borrow money through the stock bonus plan, which allows the buyout loan to be paid off with pre-tax dollars. So his innovation was considered the first ESOP, although it wasn't named an ESOP. He also started to do some things with consumer stock ownership and co-ops, and a lot of them were with agricultural groups, and started in California there. So from 21 to 1956, there were a lot of stock plans, Sears and Roebuck, J.C. Penney, Procter & Gamble, you can see the names there, but that was around, and that was the kind of framework for ESOP. So in 1964, the IRS sets this rules for plan sponsors. Before that, if you wanted to file to become an ESOP, you had to go to Washington. There was like 15 a year, and it was just bogged down. So they allowed regional offices to take the proposals, and all of a sudden you started to see 100 or 150 a year. And it started to grow. And then in 74, ERISA was passed in Congress, and that gave actual regulations and a formal legal framework for ESOPs to be established. And that's when the term ESOP was first used. So really that's around when they really started to proliferate. Some of the ESOPs that you probably heard of, the Chrysler Corp, when they were going bankrupt in 1980, they had Congress passed this Loan Guarantee Act. It was a bailout. And part of the condition of the bailout was 25% of company shares had to be held in an ESOP with the employees. And in agreement for that, the workers took a 30% wage reduction. They repaid their loan off ahead of schedule. And a few years later, they sold their stock for 3 times the amount. So it was a good plan. And then in 1984, when all the corporate raiders were out and the buyouts and the Carl Icahn, for those of you that remember back there, he was trying to buy the Stan River Mills Company, and they ended up becoming an ESOP to stop the corporate raider. And in 1984, the Tax Reform Act incentivized banks to loan monies to ESOPs. And that really were some of the things that opened it up. Then United Airlines, when they were going bankrupt in 1994, the bailout plan included a large ESOP. In return, all their unions agreed to cut their pay to 15%. So they got 55% of the company stock, were able to secure a $5 billion loan. And after a few years, the value of their stock went up $4 billion. So that worked fairly well. Then the airlines all ran into some trouble after that with the recession and with 9/11, but they all ended up going into bankruptcy eventually. Other uses for ESOPs through the years is facilitate division divestitures with large corporations, going private transactions when companies would feel that their stock was undervalued, and also defense to hostile takeovers like with Icahn. And since 1980 then, most of the ESOPs have come back to be a tool for secession. It's used for other things, but primarily it was designed for business owners that don't have a secession plan, maybe don't have children that want to keep the business running, but they have an employee group that would be very interested, so they use it for there. There are other uses, but that's primarily what it was designed for. It's gone full circle, and since 1980, that's really what the ESOPs have been all about. It's felt that during the last 50 years, ESOPs have created unanticipated wealth, economic security, and consumer purchasing power for the many millions of employees who have been fortunate enough to work for employee-owned companies. A typical ESOP scenario might apply to some of you here. Company decides to divest some or all of its ownership. It doesn't have to be selling the whole thing. It could be a small percentage. Company does a valuation with a third party. Company forms a trust and funds it with existing stock, non-leveraged, or borrows and buys shares and funds that way, leveraged, or a combination of the two. The contributions that they make are tax deductible with limitations. And so an ESOP trust is company funded, employees pay nothing. As the loan is repaid through annual pre-tax contributions, shares become available to allocate to employees' accounts. The allocations must be non-discriminatory, meaning all the employees, with few exceptions, all employees participate. And employees vest over time. Our particular scenario is if you're not of retirement age, it takes 6 years to get vested. And then when you leave the company, you don't start getting your payoff until 5 years, and you get paid over 5 years. If it's time to retire and you're retirement age, then you get paid over 5 years. So they're really also structured with the employees to be a little bit of a pension type benefit. So regulations determine a lot of what's allowed with an ESOP: contribution limits, vesting, benefit distribution, and more, although there is some flexibility there. Research shows that ESOP companies are more productive, faster growing, more profitable, have less turnover, and generate more wealth. Wages for employees in an ESOP are 5 to 12% higher, and they've found that when employees are ready to retire, if they look at all of their retirement assets, 401ks, ESOPs, an ESOP employee tends to have 3 times as much assets. Okay, so if you are considering this, who needs to be involved? And there is a little bit to it to set these things up. And the ones that I have bolded here, you have ongoing relationships with these third parties. But so who needs to be involved? If you're the trustee, you need a financial tax advisor. Well, the sellers and the buyers, or the company and the trust, all need to have financial tax advisors. They need legal help with experienced legal that are experienced with ESOPs. So then a key group in the equation are a trustee. We use a company, Great Bank Trust. They're out of Illinois. They have over 600 ESOPs that they're trustees for. This is basically what they do. And then they have legal, and they have a valuation company. They use Pendo advisors. They come in and value our company once a year, and they have about 400 of the Great Bank Trust accounts. And they come in once a year, do an extensive due diligence. Our group over here, Peter, takes care of that. And like any other valuation, they come in every year, and that's how they set the stock price. The trustee has their own legal, they have their own valuation, and then ongoing, we use a third-party administrator. Yvonne could tell you about that. It's Crow Horwath, or it's Crow now, and they help manage it moving forward. They create statements for everybody every year. They keep track of everybody's account, where their share prices are, where their vesting is, and they also support us with all the Q&A that we have with our employees in explaining the ESOP. And then Peter's got a sustainability group that helps forecast how much money we have to set aside to make sure that the ESOP accounts are funded properly, because there's a lot of forecasting involved there. And then we have an ESOP committee. Most of them are sitting here. That's the one committee I don't ever want to be on, but they're doing a great job for us, and there is some complexity here. We have outside third parties. One of our board of directors has experience with another company that was an ESOP. So when you're an ESOP, you have to be a little precise about all your reporting. And then our board of directors has a relationship also with the trustee, and our bylaws need to be in sync with the ESOP, the trustee bylaws. Some of the advantages, if you're selling to an ESOP, and this came into play a little bit with the family when they decide to sell, but an owner can sell all the business or gradually in installments. So it can be used just to start getting some of the assets out, but you can retain control of the company. But you can defer some of the capital gain on the sale depending on the type of corporation. And so sometimes there's an advantage for the seller to sell to an ESOP. The seller can have some legacy preservation and to reward long-term employees and help the owner create value in the company. Owners know they can't run the business forever and want to take care of their employees. And that's a real thing. Also, the trustee will not let them overpay, so there's always knowledge of a fair price. And if the trustee or if the company that forms the ESOP wants to take on some of the loan themselves, they can get above market on their financing. And the trust becomes exempt. The trust is the company then, that is the ESOP. The trust represents the company. They're exempt from federal and a lot of state income taxes. And then there's a couple other aspects. When you're bidding against the strategic bidder, say, it allows you to have your bid be worth a little bit more. So it allows smaller companies to compete against larger companies on a bid process when the owners want to sell. Just a couple more facts and figures. Currently, there's 6,500 ESOPs in the US, 14.2 million employees, 1.4 trillion in assets. The largest is public supermarkets in Florida with 200,000 employees. There's more employees in ESOPs than in unions in this country. Ohio has 280 of them with 731,000 employees, number 7 in the US. And what's been happening in the last 2 years, because there hasn't been as many acquisitions or selling of businesses with COVID related. You know, if your company's doing really good, you don't want to sell right now. And if your company's performing poorly, it's not the right time to sell either, COVID related. So a lot of people are getting up to 30% of a partial ESOP, and that's the first year how much write-off they can get. Also, they can work for small companies, although it is expensive to set them up, but the threshold, what I've read, is usually 20 people or more. We talked about the strategic buyers. ESOPs have less than a 1% loan repayment failure rate. Private equity purchases are 10 to 20 times higher than that. They have higher job growth rate over a 10-year period, and their 1/4 is likely to be laid off in a recession. All right, so you guys want to hand out the pop quiz that we put together? It really is a lot of information, and the concept is simple, but there is some complexity to it. So just my personal views and conclusions with our experience, they're not for everybody, they're not for every situation. And they are a little bit expensive to set up and get into. If you don't do it right, you'll pay on the back end. And there's a lot of seminars and webinars out there to get a little bit more educated, a lot more than we went over today. But absolutely, before you ever pull the trigger, you have to get with your financial advisors and your legal and really see if it's the right thing for you. But so far, it's been working great for us, and we're happy that we did it.
Questions?
Are there any questions for Dan? Mike's got the microphone.
Switching topics on. A little bit. What do you see as the future of organic food, locally and worldwide?
Well, that category is growing 10 times as fast as everything else in the store. And it's not just a demographic thing anymore. All demographics, age groups. There's a lot of people that want to eat healthier. We just put in a healthy living program in all of our stores, so I suggest you make sure you check that out. But we have 3,000 items all across the store, the perimeter, the center store. And it just keeps growing and growing, and there's always new stuff right around the bend. So, you know, people want to live forever and get healthy, so.
How has the culture changed the company since becoming an ESOP?
That's a really good question. We, initially, not as much as we were thinking, but initially your stock value was just starting out and you're carrying a lot of debt. So the stock value reflects that. So we made a big deal about it. On a lot of effort, Q&As, going out to all the stores. And, you know, you're an owner of the company. It's going to be great, but then they get their annual notice and it wasn't that big of a deal. They were only 20% vested. But now that we're a few years into it and the company's been doing well and they're higher vested, they're starting to take notice of it. And so our thing when we have meetings, we says, you know, if you could just act like you're an owner. Oh, wait a minute, you are an owner. But it's helping in my view. It's getting better.
I got a question. You mentioned about research that there was increase. I'm sorry, I should say that. You mentioned that there's increased retention and also profitability. Have you been able to measure that or quantify that?
Well, for us, we're only in the 4th year. Like I said, the real culture change has just been started. But this COVID problem in the last 2 years has been so large that it affects everything. All our numbers, all our retention numbers, our turnover numbers. So I don't think we could answer your question just yet, but you know, we are aware of that and we do want to measure it. Becoming certified is a great place to work. You know, we took 2 surveys and we didn't pass the first one, then we passed the second one. So that's probably a pretty good indicator. And a lot of the comments that we got from the survey, you know, and people that tend to want to have a career with us, it's even more important. A lot of our employees are part-time and they're only with us for a few years, and then they go on to college type thing. So it's maybe not quite as important for them because they're not going to be with us for a while.
Has the Buehler's ESOP plan taken place of a more traditional retirement plan, like 401k plan?
We still have a 401k and it complements that.
Do you still match
No,
that as well?
we stopped doing that. You know, we're always considering that every year. But initially, you know, we wanted to get our arms around the cost.
I'm a program within the garage door industry. We've had a lot of people asking about that. And one of the things I've noticed today is that you have a terrific advantage in that you have strong management, whereas a owner operator wanting to do this way may not have that kind of difference, because we always say there's a big difference between an employee and an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the question, but I agree with what you said, absolutely.
Right. Question basically is it does take very good management to make these workers just the way the owner operator.
Yeah, and I think if you're family owned, you're used to the family running the business. I come from a family owned business, and yeah, I think an ESOP is on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, who sets like the upper management salaries and bonuses?
Our board, and the ESOP trustee who represents all the shareholders, he gets involved on large issues, and it's actually spelled out in the bylaws what they would get involved with and what they wouldn't get involved with. However, we update them on anything that's meaningful enough. Everything that we would update our board on, we update the trustee on also.
So then does the trustee not have ownership in the company?
No, he's the third party, the neutral third party. He represents the shareholders.
Without ownership?
Right.
Cool. I'm just curious.
How am I doing so far? I'm a technical expert. Don't correct me if I.
Any other questions?
Dan, thank you for joining us today. I know I speak for everybody here that we were very happy when the ESOP came into play and that the company was able to stay locally owned. So we appreciate everything that you do for the community. In recognition of your time with us today, I know when you were here 8 years ago, you might have got a little bit different version of this. This is our version of the rotary wheel with the 4-way test on the back, and they're made locally by the village now.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I know the statistics on the grocery industry were kind of interesting in the COVID year, because I know in our house, both of my kids were living back with us for a period of time. And at the end of 2020, we got a thank you letter from Buehler's. Said, thank you for being one of our best customers. And I said to Mike, how much money did we actually spend on you? So just a quick reminder, our next meeting will be January 3rd. 2022, and that will be classification talks. In the interim, I hope everybody has a great holiday season filled with happiness and hope. So we stand adjourned. Thank you for sharing.